Mankind has an inherent fear of the dark, born from millions of years of being subject to these cycles of night and day, without the aid of incandescent bulbs and the buzzing neon luminescence of cityscapes. There is an instinctual fear of what hunts through the shadows, be it man, beast, or other. I've seen one such other before. I've been hunted by it. 4 years ago, I lived on a small patch of land in rural Kansas. The property had been my great-grandparents', and when they passed, it was granted to my grandmother, and then to my mother, and then to me when my parents eventually moved. I was a newly minted graduate student in need of a home and space to grow while I paid down my debts and began life in earnest. I had visited periodically throughout college, and the charm of the place was undeniable. And as my parents aged, their ability to physically keep up with the place began to wane. And so, when the inevitability of time bore down on them, and my mother struggled through tears to let go of one of the few family relics we possessed, I offered to act as its caretaker. It was a secluded space, about an hour's drive from the nearest city, connected to the blacktop veins of the country by a mile-long dirt road. The homestead proper came with a chicken coop, the tenants of which I was charged with taking care of. A large trapezoid building that housed the myriad of ancient equipment that was rusted over when I was born. A small garden, and was interspersed with pine trees and evergreens to act as windbreaks in the temperamental Kansas weather. Surrounding it were vast pastures dotted with cottonwood copses and muddy creeks, all of which I took to exploring, giving name and purpose to every warren, grove, and prairie. This was my home, a place where I would be lulled into a gentle trance by the humming cicadas and dancing fireflies in the warm summer twilight. There was a rhythmic complacency to life there. I would have described it as paradisiacal, the flow of day and night punctuated only by the buzzing on of the sole source of artificial light, of an overhead yard light signaling that it was time to retire. When the home was granted to me, my mother dictated to me several rules, most of them I expected. Watch the ground for rattlesnakes, keep the chickens inside at night, don't answer the door for strangers, if there's a tornado, get into the crawl space under the house. The typical mothering that comes from worried parents. 2 of them, however, struck me as odd a couple of weeks after I had settled in. When the yard light comes on, go inside and stay inside. If you are outside after dark, never run. Rabbits run, mice run, prey animals run. Never run. Those 2 I found strange, but knowing that I shared this patch of wilderness with wild animals, I made the connection that she was speaking of coyotes or mountain lions. That's where I made my first mistake. The second came when I violated the first of the above 2 warnings. I had just gotten home late from my job in the aforementioned city. It was a late autumn night and the trees were just beginning to shed their leaves. Nightfall had been slowly advancing itself with ever-creeping persistence. The yard light was on. The chickens had yet to be shut in, and I was exhausted. I gathered my flashlight and made the 100-meter trek to the chicken coop from my front door. As soon as my foot hit the dirt, I felt the hair on my neck prickle and my paranoia skyrocket. I thought about bringing Charlie, my old mutt, but he was fast asleep inside the house and it was only a short jaunt down the driveway. I rushed through the darkness. The only sound echoing in the night was my boots on the gravel and the rustle of fallen leaves, my flashlight fixated on the reflective tin of the coop. I closed the rust and splinter-ridden door with some effort, and it let out a sharp squeal, and then I was enveloped in silence. I turned my back to the dark, towards home, and I felt that regressed, childlike fear of the dark, this time far stronger than before. I was being watched, I was sure of it. The journey into the dark is easy, but it's when you turn your back to it, to the yawning night enfolded wilderness, that you feel what prey feels like. Panic, cold and weighty panic. Never run. Prey animals run. My mother's warning cut through the frenzy building inside me. There's nothing out there. You're imagining it. My mind desperately tried to assert control over itself. I began to do what I had always done as a child, in fighting with my fear of the dark. I slowed my pace, straightened my back, and let out a warbling song to show that I was unafraid of whatever imagined ghost haunted the dark corners of a lightless room, or the perpetual blackness of a moonless night. Until I made it to my front door when the facade broke and I hurried inside, giving the snoozing Charlie a pat on the head before removing my shoes and climbing into bed. 4 in the morning, I woke up again. I had always been plagued by hot flashes at night, and tonight they came for me again, caressing me with their sweltering embrace. I decided to move to the living room, which was generally cooler than the rest of the house, and resume sleeping on the couch. To give a little visual for you, my living room was the first room in the house that you would enter in through the door, replete with rustic furniture, and a large picture window with my couch directly under it. From the window you could see the rest of the farm, the long gravel driveway to the coop, and beyond the coop our barn, and beyond that the large metal trapezoid shop. Beneath that window I vied for sleep, and it was through that window that I would be presented with the grim truth of mankind's precarious perch in the hierarchy of nature. I furtively tossed and turned on the couch, and eventually gave up after about an hour and a half, simply staring at the ceiling, resigned to my sleepless fate, when I heard a low growl. Charlie was growling. I could see the orange light from our yard lights reflected in his deep brown eyes as he clambered up on the couch next to me, despite his age, to stare at the window at whatever his senses had picked up. His persistence alarmed me, and I sat up to join him in his nervous watch. I wish what I had seen was a mountain lion. Then it would make sense. My fragile understanding of what walks on this earth would have been left intact, and I would have been able to live my life without nightlights at the age of 27, without the regressed fear of long dark hallways and the lightless corners of the world. What I saw, though, was something far worse, far bigger than a mountain lion in every sense of the word. I saw its shadowed form first turning the corner of the shop, graceful in its own slinking, hunched over way, and it was massive. Easily 8 feet tall as it crawled on long, spindly limbs through the dark, crawling its way slowly towards our house. The dawning horror came that it was moving with purpose, occluding itself behind the coop, trees, whatever it thought could hide its bulk from vision, hide itself from me. It had seen me and was stalking me as surely as a cat stalks a mouse, and it was closing in. I wanted to scream, but my fear had driven beyond the ability to articulate even the most primal reaction. Don't scream. Prey screams. Despite the alarm, I resolved to watch it, albeit hidden, peeking over the window frame as it crawled through the trees now, its long, ape-like arms stretching out and wrapping its hands around the trunk of trees as it pulled itself forward. I could make out now that it was humanoid in appearance, though still featureless in the shadows as it methodically avoided the yard light. Perhaps it realized at that moment that I could see it, that the game was over, and its window of opportunity was marginally narrower. Perhaps my boldness in watching it brought about some malicious challenge between it and I, because it soon dropped its stealthy approach altogether, stepping into the buzzing orange light of the electrical pole overhead, and standing upright. It was horrifically tall, like a giant out of some ancient fable, and its flesh was the color of old bark, twisted and sinewy, stretched taut like mummified skin. It had the barest resemblance to a human, its face contorted into a tortured scream. Jagged and mangled teeth jutted out from its yawning cavity. Charlie was now in a frenzy, and I fell back from the couch as it slumped forward towards the house. The animal instinct that still remains in mankind took over, and I frantically attempted to back away, deeper into the house, safer perhaps. Its shadow fell across the window as it hunted me, searching for a means to get inside. I fled to the bathroom at the back of the house and hid in safety, Charlie still barking in a maddened state as he ran up and down the length of the house. And then I saw it bend down to peer through the bathroom window, its dark, recessed eyes gleaming maliciously with a hungry light as it proceeded to smash its claws against the window. I had already violated what I quickly realized the most sacrosanct warning my mother had given me. And now, I was going to violate the second one. I was going to run, and whatever cognitive facilities I still possessed cobbled together a plan. The crawl space under the house was barely large enough for me to get through. I could huddle down there safe from this abomination, or I would be trapped. The options were few. Its incessant pounding finally broke through the window as it reached through, pawing frantically to try and reach and wrench me out. I tore out of the bathroom and slammed the door as it began pulling its ropey bulk through the window, groaning with effort. Charlie was at the door and would have lunged through if I wasn't quicker. I scooped him up with an adrenaline-fueled strength and bolted to the garage, where the doors to the crawl space sat dusty and worn in the pavement. I had bought us time and unlatched the storm door, carefully lowering Charlie into the cellar before joining him, both of us swallowed up by the darkness. I had forgotten my flashlight as I felt along the crumbling cement walls of the cellar, until I found a small door, barely the size of a cabinet door, that led under the house itself. And then I heard it, the monster thumping and yowling against the metal door above us, tearing at it in desperation. I ushered Charlie through the tiny door to our last hope for survival, and I shut it behind me, methodically dragging him and myself through the dirt and mold to the furthest corner that we could squeeze ourselves into. The squeal of the storm door's latch pierced the darkness. It was clever enough to work latches. I heard it thrash its way down into the cellar, thumping and writhing in the claustrophobic space of the cellar, in a rage as it howled in fury at its prey escaping. Charlie had gone quiet now, shivering against me in the gloom and refusing to look behind us. My eyes remained locked on that tiny, flimsy door, the only barrier between us and that horror that thrashed and screamed in the cellar. I don't know how long it continued like that. It felt like we had lived several lifetimes down in that grimy corner, but eventually it seemed to give up. The thrashing stopped, the growling stopped, and I heard it clamber clumsily back the way that it came, its heavy footsteps thudding against the floorboards until those too ceased. Charlie and I spent the rest of the night underneath there, and it wasn't until I could hear the morning doves singing and the roosters cawing that I dared to move from our corner sanctuary. The cellar had remarkably stood strong against its onslaught, but the house had seen better days. Door frames splintered, furniture shredded and overturned, glass shattered in the monster's destructive path. The first thing I did after taking it all in was pack my bags. The second thing I did was fish Charlie out of the crawl space, and the third thing I did was drive towards the rising sun, and away from whatever hidden malevolence had revealed itself in my little patch of Eden. I rented a hotel room in the city, and spent the next 2 days there, making short trips back home to scoop up the rest of my possessions, and making plans to stay with my parents across the state. My mother was shocked to hear of what had occurred that night, but she believed me. When I asked, dumbfounded as to why she would let me live in such a place, She explained to me that she had never actually experienced anything like that while living there, that the warnings she gave me were handed down from my great-grandparents, but they had never explained why. In her time living there, she had always felt something off about the property after dark, but had always heeded the warnings herself, chalking them up as much as I had, as pertaining to coyotes and mountain lions. My grandparents have long since passed. The answers as to what that monster was or where it came from have been swallowed up by the earth and scattered to the howling winds of the prairies. Now, as the sun goes down and the night advances on the day, I watch the elongating shadows and shudder before retreating into the safety of my home, and recall a warning that's haunted me since my panicked flight from that old, lonely farmhouse. If you are outside after dark, never run.